Hey guys, welcome to this. It's another exclusive video for those of you who've bought my English language revision guide ebook. And I know that one of the hardest things about this new GCSE is this idea of taking a piece of writing, a non-fiction piece of writing, often from the 19th century, and trying to analyse how the writer uses language. Teachers and students find this very difficult because it's not something we're used to doing. Many of us will analyse fiction pieces, but not non-fiction. So what I want to look at in this video is this letter that you can see on the screen, a non-fiction real-life letter. It was written in 1864 by Jane Welsh Carlyle, who is the wife, or was the wife, of Thomas Carlyle, a cultural commentator. And essentially, she had a bit of a bad experience. All of the china or crockery in her house was either stolen or broken during her long illness. And in the end, she decided to sack Helen, one of her two servants. And this is a letter where she is reporting a conversation with a neighbour who was helping out while the other servant, Mary, was taking time off to visit relatives. And it's interesting to think about the way the writer uses language in this piece. So we'll have a read through, I'll talk through some ideas, but think about how language is used. Well, ma'am, said the woman, it is known to all the neighbours round here. You will be told some day, and if I don't tell you now, you will blame me for having let you be so deceived. Mary is the worst of girls. She had an illegitimate child in your house on the 29th of last July. It was her second child, and all the things that you have been missing have been spent on her man and her friends. There has been constant company kept in your kitchen since there was no fear of your seeing it, and whenever Helen threatened to tell you, she frightened her into silence by threats of poisoning her and cutting her own throat. Now, my dear, if you had seen the creature, Mary, you would have just as soon have suspected the Virgin Mary of such things. But I've investigated and find it all true. For 2 years I've been cheated and made a fool of, and laughed at for my softness by this half-idiotic-looking woman, and while she was crying in my room, moaning out what would become of her if I died, and witnessing in me as sad a spectacle of human agony as could have been anywhere seen, she was giving suppers to men and women downstairs, laughing and swearing. Oh, I can't go on. It is too disgusting. I shall only say that while she was in labour in the small room at the end of the dining room, Mr. Carlyle was taking tea in the dining room with Miss Dewsbury talking to him. Just a thin, small door between them. The child was not born till 2 in the morning, when Mr. C. was still reading in the drawing room. By that time Helen had fetched 2 women, one of whom took the child to be nursed. Need one ask where all my fine napkins went, when it is now known that the creature had not prepared a rag of clothing for the child? Imagine coming to the knowledge of all this when I was retching at any rate. Of course, the wretch on her return in a cab last Tuesday, bringing the wretched boy father along with her in broad daylight to have his dinner, was met by a small packet containing her wages and the news it was all found out. She hurried the papa into the cab again, and they drove off together. Now, the first thing I want to say here is, although this is a work of non-fiction, okay, though it's a real piece of writing, we mustn't be naive and think that it isn't written for a purpose, and that it isn't written and crafted. And that's the thing. You will be given a non-fiction piece of writing, probably from the 19th century, but it will be well crafted, it will be well written with deliberate language choices. There are a few things we can say. Feel free to pause the video and have a think about what you might say. This is quite an amusing piece of writing. It sort of flips between narrative and descriptive, outraged and emotional. There's some vivid and intimate language, there's direct speech, the multiple exclamation marks are very important as well. Look at this over-the-top exaggeration. Now, there are a few specifics that are quite clever. Firstly, the writer's flippant reference to the Virgin Mary. The woman was called Mary, and there was a link to the Virgin Mary. It's being sarcastic, but also potentially blasphemous, bearing in mind this is a piece of Victorian writing, and it's used for humorous effect, but it's also quite risque of the writer. There's also a very self-pitying surface of the text, and we do kind of wonder whether actually we should be accepting at face value what she is saying here, or whether there's an element of self-mockery and knowing over-exaggeration from the writer, which deliberately intends to entertain the recipient. If you know the BBC version of Pride and Prejudice, it does sound a lot like Mrs. Bennet stressing, "Oh, Hugh!" And you can pick out words and phrases that seem to be deliberately over the top. And we can question, is she really self-pitying, or is she using that deliberate over-exaggeration to try and entertain her reader? And I think, there's probably a bit of both. There's this hyperbolic, over-the-top self-dramatization where it says things like, "Witnessing in me as sad a spectacle of human agony as could have been anywhere seen." The multiple underlinings and the exclamation marks, the rhetorical flushes such as, "Need one ask?" and "Oh, I can't go on," although of course she does. So there's plenty to explore in the language used in this piece to entertain and dramatize and exaggerate and hyperbolize the experience the writer went through. Also, we can pick out some of the details which show us this is very much a middle class attitude, with words like fine napkins, reading in the drawing room, and that is juxtaposed with the language of very lower class demonization language of the working class. The sort of servants are described with laughing and swearing, threats of poisoning, cutting her own throat. So there's a juxtaposition of very positive emotive language and negative emotive language, which highlights the difference, the great divide between the rich woman and her poor servants. The use of labels such as the creature and the boy father dehumanize and villainize the child and his father as well. There is a bit of humour in the use of puns and double meanings. There are the association of the homophones wretch, W-R-E-T-C-H, and wretch, R-E-T-C-H, which is, very much interesting to think about, as is the comical reference to the Virgin Mary. Also interesting that the writer refers to her husband as Mr. C. You can think about, why is that? Is it a joke, a kind of jokey familiarity, a term of endearment, or is it that this woman is, although educated, is actually just conforming to the Victorian stereotype of the submissive wife, unable, even in a letter to her friend, to address her husband by his Christian name? So you can see these, older texts, although they are non-fiction, they do use language for effect. I hope that's been useful.